Portuguese migrants to Angola have often been framed positively as skilled expatriates, while Angola migrants in Portugal are frequently portrayed negatively or unskilled or economic migrants. Again, I'm pushing away what Iriam said yesterday. Sorry, I'm butchering your name. This asymmetry reflects what Doreen Massey describes as power geometry, the idea that mobility is shaped by unequal spatial relations of power. So my argument is that traditional distinction between forced migration and voluntary migration is often too rigid. Economic crisis can also compel migration, even in absence of war or political persecution. These categories therefore obscure the complex ways in which crises reshape mobility and create movement in multiple directions. So then I'm talking about my research gaps. There are three research gaps that my study tried to address. So the first research gap is migration studies have rarely examined migration flows between Europe and Africa in both directions, particularly in relation to economic crisis. Most research focus overwhelmingly on African migration to Europe. Migration from Europe to Africa is often ignored or treated as insignificant. When European migration in Africa is discussed, it's usually framed in historical terms, in particular in relation to colonial expansion and settlement. This focus has led some scholars to argue that migration studies remain Eurocentric, concentrate primarily on migration flows that directly affect Western European while ignoring other important migration dynamics. By examining Portuguese migration to Angola and Angola migration to Portugal, this study highlights migration flows that challenge this dominant perspective. The second gap concerns the conceptual distinction between forced migration and voluntary migration. In migration studies, forced migration is often associated mainly with war, conflict, and political persecution. However, economic crisis can also create situations where people feel compelled to migrate even if they are not fleeing violence. In the case of Portugal, and economic pressures such as unemployment, austerity policies, and decline of economic opportunities play a major role in shaping migration decisions. As Oliver Bakewell notes, whether migration is perceived as forced or voluntary often depends on which stage of migration process is examined and when the assessment is made. Therefore, migration should be understood as multidimensional rather than fitting neatly into fixed categories. The third gap concerns with comparison between European migration in Africa and African migration to Europe are still very rare. Most comparative research focuses primarily on migration patterns within the global north. By comparing Portuguese migrants in Angola with Angola migrants in Portugal, this study contributes to more balanced understanding of migration dynamics in post-colonial context. So some of key results. The findings show that although both migration flows are influenced by economic crisis, the experience of migration were very different. Portuguese migration in Angola often benefit from better employment opportunity and higher social status. In many cases, colonial legacies shape perceptions of competence and expertise. For example, Portuguese migrants were frequently perceived as skilled professionals even when qualifications were modest. Some interviews suggest that in Angola, I met one who claimed to be an engineer in Portugal, but actually in Angola. He was an electrician in Angola, and in Portugal, when he went to Portugal, was electrician in Portugal. When he went to Angola, he became engineering. So that's the difference. Oh, I met a person who, one of my interlocutors, she told me she was a teacher, high school teacher in Portugal, but when she moved to Angola, she became a university professor at a private institution. So these perceptions are linked to what scholars describe as coloniality, where European knowledge and expertise continue to be valued more highly than local knowledge. So obviously, if you come from Portugal, people automatically assume that you know it all, you have all together, and but also applies to Portugal. When I go there, I say I come from a German university, they take me seriously. If I said I come from Angola, then they don't invite me. So Anyway, in contrast, Angola migrants in Portugal often face structural disadvantage and negative stereotypes, even when they are highly qualified. One Angola interviewed explained that during professional meetings in Portugal, people sometimes assumed that it was a janitor rather than a consultant responsible for evaluating business. These reflect what Doreen Massey calls space invaders. Again, I'm linking to what you said, where black bodies are expected to be in certain hierarchies or certain position. When they find themselves in positions of power, then perceived, as been said, as not belonging to that position. Again, these include questions of gender, race, class, and historical relations of power. How migration is perceived, or how migrants are perceived and treated. Portuguese migrants are often welcome in Angola, are seen as professional skills, while Angola migrants were more frequently viewed as suspicious and regarded as low skills. So now we come to the most interesting part, the challenge existing research concepts. Obviously, I use a lot of, the question maybe you might be asking, why would Portuguese will be going to Angola? What is the point of a European going to Angola? So I think at the beginning of my research, I had a bit of issues because people never took me serious until one professor from Sweden started doing the same research as me, and all of a sudden I got the position. So anyway, that's beside the point. So the theoretical framework that I'm trying to work on is world system theory, obviously by Giovanni Aranghi, the concept of core, periphery, and semi-periphery. Here I'm looking at how Portuguese is positioned within this world system, and then I use the Lusophone migration system to understand how Portugal, because Portuguese as a country is a country that send migrants, also receive migrants. And then I'm trying to look at how within the Lusophone migration system, Portugal is situated as attracting migrants from former colonies, also sending migrants to the colonies. So I have some methodologies challenge uh, rooted in colonial history, race, global inequality. Ultimately, the case of reciprocal migration between Angola and Portugal shows that migration categories such as forced and voluntary migration are often too simplistic to capture the complex realities of mobilities in times of crisis. Sorry, I'm 2 minutes ahead. Sorry. Thank you so much. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Asaf. Merci. Yeah, one thing that I liked from this session, this entire session, is that yes, we are rushing the presenters.
Um, I think the if we have to be more precise, actually after the war you have lots of business moving. First you have the business moving, and later on when the crisis hit, and you have lots of Portuguese moving to Angola. And it was, I wouldn't say it was once off, but you also have to understand the history of the country. So you have lots of Angolans, you have like 0.15% of white Angolans, then you have mixed Angolans, mixed race, I don't, yeah, whatever you want to classify. And many of them are still have ancestors in Portugal, and they're allowed to have dual citizenship. And many of them have political power. And then you have a second category of, well, they used to be called civilized during the colonial times. Those also have access to citizenship. Like my father, he does have a Portuguese citizenship, um, but we never renew citizenship, so I don't have. But anyways, but you have certain people who have still connected to Portugal and so forth. So in that sense, it's difficult to say it was once off, but you did have like a peak of people coming in in 2007, 2008. Um, some were linked, they had links to Angola, some didn't have links to Angola. So that's, yeah.
Thank you so much. This helps. It's not only one event, but also kind of connection in different forms. Thank you so much. Maybe one or two very important interventions that you think you will hit when we bring the stories later.
Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to find out whether the framing of the migrants from Portugal to Angola as useful migrants is the framing of Angolans themselves, the political elite, or Angolan whites. And the second thing is to find out from you, when you look at statistics, comparing the numbers that leave Angola to Portugal and the number that left Portugal or leave Portugal to Angola, do you can you really say that there are many migrants from Portugal to Angola?
Yeah. I would say yes. I mean, I'm actually not the only one working on it. There is a professor in Ali, in Sweden. There's a professor in Sweden also doing. She did on Angola and she did also in Mozambique and she did also in Cabo Verde. But I look at Angola because you had within Africa you have more Portuguese going to Angola, so to say. Um, yeah, in terms of framing, so you wanted to know whether the Angolan was framing positively or negative. What was sorry? Oh yeah. Oh, thank yeah. Yeah. Um the first stage you have the media. That's how they present it first. But then Passos Coelho, who used to be the prime minister, frame it as also a way to capitalize on use the capital language. You know, you have to go to Angola, and then you also use the idea um, of helping to develop, and so there's so many opportunities there that we cannot offer. But then that's why I use the question, the coloniality element. You do have both ways. You have the Portuguese framing, also you have the Angolan framing themselves. So there is the idea that everything that comes from Portugal is better. Everyone who comes from Portugal knows better than anyone else. So that's where the idea of coloniality comes in. I mean, coloniality is the idea that the Portuguese or the colonial master left, but the idea of who works hard, the idea who knows better, the idea of who who have the know-how continue to play a significant role in the minds of people. And in Angola, is quite strong in that sense that if you come for Portugal, automatically people think that you know it well, you know it all. And there is also a question of language. How do you speak? How do you behave? And there is all this colonial understanding of civilization. Um, so in that sense, I would say the frame is from the Angolan certain sector of the Angolan society and for migrants themselves. So many Portuguese that I interview, they always say, well, the Angolans don't work hard. They don't come to work on Fridays because they like party. On Mondays they always come late because they spend the whole weekend partying and so. And some Angolans will say, well, I'd rather send my kid to a Portuguese school because there I can pay more, but the kid actually learned, and so you have these narratives playing around this discourse of
Thank you. So our next presenter is Dr. Salkati Wasinya from Addis Ababa University. Has a PhD in social anthropology from Martin Luther University, and is associate professor of sociology and anthropology. Yeah, his research interest is on forced migration, climate change, identity, language, and border studies. Um, he has led various projects, particularly focusing on South Sudan neighbors. South Sudan, Sudan, so Henry was frequently warning me, you guys need to socialize with other colleagues. You are always late.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. See the advantage of presenting last. and being chaired by a country boy. Yeah? So, no, my presentation built this on what yesterday Faisal Garba uh, started on categorization, and Danny also touched upon this right now. Then I've been uh, changing and reframing this presentation several times. Now, my working title is Rating Displacement, Conflict, Climate Change, and the Limits of Categories Taking the Somali Region of Ethiopia. So let me start just right from the problem. Uh, in the Horn of Africa, now I see I think in all Africa kind of, displacement uh, is commonly framed as uh, isolated events with categories, several categories uh, of physical movement is named refugees, IDPs, returnees, conflict versus climate displacement, now IDP returnees, and the categories continue, especially in countries with major displacement crisis. Based on this, in this presentation, I try to argue 3 points, but the first two are my major presentation today. These are, I argue for grounding our analysis in a processual structural violence that produced this overlapping, protracted, but also intersecting displacement instead of focusing on the humanitarian categories. Yesterday, Faisal said the legal categories, which are a little bit simplistic. The second one is we need to expand our conceptualization of displacement beyond the physical movement. See, again, I'm building on others. The third one, which I may not uh, cover properly, is the need to emphasize the agency of the displaced people, which was again covered by one of the previous presentations. Let me give you a setting, or let me set the context. The Horn of Africa, whatever the Horn is, at least the greater Horn of Africa, which includes Ethiopia, Somalia, parts of Kenya, or the whole Kenya, Uganda, South Sudan, Sudan, is a region known as, see, a corner of displacement, even in the African standard. We are in a displacement crisis where currently there are over 20 million IDPs and around 5.6 million refugees. That's why I called it a corner of displacement, even in African standard. Then coming to Ethiopia, again with the changing number, Ethiopia has around 4 million IDPs and at the same time hosts about 1.1 million refugees. The Somali region, where I'm going to talk about, is hosting over 3,000 refugees from Somalia, but also it has around 1 million IDPs from the region. Then, uh, okay, no, I was, in terms of research methods, I mean, this is based on my longitudinal engagement in the region in the last 5, 6 years. So, I mean, I have a lot of, field work in both refugee camps and IDP camps, but also in the whole region. I have a big number of data, which I don't talk that much due to time. Uh, okay, so let me start with what I call structural violence that produce this overlapping displacement. Now I'm talking. Overlapping. Displacement is when there are displacement due to several factors at the same time or at different times that produce uh, different categories of displacement community. Let me start with historical structural violence that starts with colonization, where this is Ethiopian Somali region. It is bordered by Djibouti in the north. Djibouti is a French-speaking Somali. Then uh, in the northeast you have Somaliland, which happened to be a British Somaliland. Then in the south we have Republic of Somalia, which was Italian Somaliland. Then this is Ethiopian part of Somalia because Ethiopia competed with colonizers and they took it as part. So that's where the structure of violence started, you see, with the region. Then in post-independence, Somali nationalists came up with a project called Greater Somalia, where they designed and planned to bring all the Somali-speaking region to form one Greater Somalia. That is Somali nationalist project. That caused the conflict with their neighbors. The major one was with Ethiopia. That in 1970s, see, that caused displacement of between 500,000 and 1 million Somalis from Ethiopia who fled to Somalia. In 1991, the government of Somalia collapsed, and the millions of Somalis left Somalia, and they fled to Ethiopia and Kenya mainly. Then again in 2008, see, with the emergence of Islamic extremist group called Al-Shabaab, again over 200,000 Somalis left Somalia. Now again they ran to Ethiopia. And very recently there was a war between Somaliland and the Somalia in Lasanod. Then another over 100 people displaced. Internally, you see, I mean, yesterday again, Faisal touched upon that. Due to Ethiopian internal conflict, again, see, between 2017 and 2023, there were, see, hundreds of thousands of displacement due to internal conflict. This is one category of conflict, I mean, displacement called conflict-affected displacement. Then the second one is drought. When I was doing field work between 2021 and 2023, see, rain fell 5 consecutive seasons, see, which for about 3 years, that displaced again millions, but not only displacement, but you see, it killed over 3.7 million livestock, see, in Somali region and in the neighboring southern Oromia. Then in 2023, see, a month after rain started, see, flood displaced hundreds of thousands, and they dismantled all the irrigation system in the river valley, which was relatively saved from the drought. Then my argument is, let me reflect on this before I continue. My argument is, see, these are not separate events. They are all results of this spiral of violence, where I say colonial legacies, nationalism, religious extremism, environmental pressures, they all intersect and they reinforce each other, provide and producing multiple overlapping and protracted displacements. Refugees, returnees, IDPs, conflict versus climate and displacement are results of this spiral violence, and they should not be understood as separate events. We need to see them together. Some of these people, the refugees, the IDPs, and you continue, actually experiencing either all of these categories or part of these categories. Some of the families have, see, part of the family is refugee, the other part is IDP, the other part is whatever you call in the category. They live together, sometimes in the same neighborhood. Some are family members across the categories. They support each other. So this requires analysis that takes these different aspects of the social experiences together instead of struggling with the categories, simplistic categories. Then I continue, but what advantage of presenting last? No, I can't read this. This is about the fluidity of the categories from people's experience, but I just pass this because of time. Then my other argument is to go beyond or taking this, displacement as physical movement. I said beyond forced migration. Here I argue that while forced migration deserves our attention, the physical movement deserves our attention, I argue that we need to challenge the notion of equalizing displacement and the forced migration. I have 3 pointers for this. The first one is what is called displacement in place. See, the cumulative effect of what I have been describing is a loss of livelihood, loss of assets, especially when the people live on livestock and they lost all the livestock, which means they lost their assets, which means their livelihood has been disrupted. What we see is the, there is acute malnutrition, high mortality rate, new survival strategies, some of them are negative. This is displacement without migration. Then our displacement, or there is displacement in place, which means displacement without movement. I'm using this map. See, this is a relief map from NGO. See, this is green, blue, whatever you call it, shows minimal, food insecurity stress. The yellow one is stress. The light brown shows crisis, which means the Somali part of Ethiopia is almost all the region is in crisis, which means even those who have not been displaced have been displaced from their livelihood. Second argument I make in relation to this is the temporality of displacement. Here I say, Salentina with her field work in South and Latin America, she say, when does the clock of displacement start? So, and the argument is that, displacement, especially this slow onset, displacement caused by drought, usually start longer time before it cause forces movement. So people are bothered. It is also, I want to try to relate this to structural violence because climate change is not only natural. The days of this old livestock is not only natural, but also policy failure, which is structural violence. And third point is specific to Somali region or to nomadic pastoralists. For nomadic pastoralists, displacement does not mean physical movement because they are all, their livelihood is already in movement. They are mobile. So when they lose their livelihood, they don't move. Rather, they become immobile. They become, sedentarized by force. So my argument is, in this regard, displacement and immobility are not only interrelated, but also immobility is a result of displacement. So displacement causes immobility. Thus, the concept of displacement should be expanded to include the process that disrupt the valued and locally viable livelihood strategy. This is the last one. I've concluded. Yeah. So I argue that in a situation of intractable crisis, double and protracted displacement is focusing on abstract categories rather than the human being hides complex political, social, and economic contexts that have generated the displacement process. Building on different scholars, I suggest to rethink our conceptualization of displacement and I see it as a process which disrupts the ability of people to live in a valued way of life rather than this narrow physical movement. Of course, I mentioned in Somali a specific case. So I am trying to say for the policymakers and the humanitarian intervention, at least they can show this by using area-based approach in their intervention instead of the abstract categories. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fakad. He took 2 more minutes, not because he is my countryman or no, 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 not, not only that. And even not, we say river boy in Ethiopia. Not that, but he promised 2 gazelle in the evening. Thank you so much. It was so interesting, particularly connecting it to the uh, colonial system, the colonial situations. You know, as you know more, in the African borders, you have the Somali in Ethiopia, you have the Somali in Somalia, you have the Somali in Djibouti, you have the Somali in Kenya. So when there is a crisis, then you go to your neighbor. And I mean, although we call it in the refugee regime and we speak about the conventions or so, people are moving not trusting the conventions, and so they are moving trusting their kinship and relationship. And that was very interesting. Maybe was there any change in the pattern, because you said your study is your longitudinal. I know you were studying the Somali situation for a long. So in the long period, what strong change have you observed? A very something that has changed the situation.
Thank you so much. The change, I mean, the first time I went to this region was in 2008 or 7 when I was a PhD student. Uh, by then, working in the capital city of the region called Jigjiga, you don't find a single beggar on the street. I was in Somali region last week. I just came on Sunday. No, Sunday. On Monday, I had to fly here on Tuesday. And now the street is full of beggars. One of the changes. Second, this intensity of the conflict now related to more global issues. Ethiopia tried to give recognition to Somaliland 2 years ago. Now Israel made it. See, now the intensity of the conflict continues. See, the internal displacement is relatively paused in the last 1 year or so, but the external one has continued. So, see, the changes from bad to worse probably when you see the displacement. Uh, but there are some development activities. Relatively, the, the region is relatively calm. There are some development activities. There are some investments. The diaspora engagement, the capital city of the region is booming. There are some positive developments as well.
So one or two interventions which you could see very important.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Um, I was wondering, you talked about the Somalis, in Djibouti being the French Somali, and then all those Somalis that which are within the region. So, how do they perceive each other? You know, a Somali in Djibouti, is he perceived as a foreigner in I mean, yeah, in Somaliland, or or in Ethiopia? How do they perceive themselves? That's the
Somali's perception of each other across these colonial boundaries is uh, extremely positive towards each other. For the Somali, what is more important is clans than that colonial borders. So, and the clans are distributed across these borders. So, the Somali man, I mean, actually they don't recognize borders. Somalia, both institutionally as well as individually, they don't recognize the borders. Somali's prime minister half a century ago said, there is no border between two brothers. There is that sentiment, among the Somali community up to today. And recently, when the Ethiopian Prime Minister declared this relationship with Somaliland, the issue of recognition, You see, he tried to invoke issue of ethnicity, and they said the whole Somalia and the other part of the world are enjoying, see, the coastal territories, you see, the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, and they said, I mean, what peculiar or unique, see, bad thing has the Somali of Ethiopia or the Afar of Ethiopia, see, did, because you are Somali, your brothers have access, you don't have access. So invoking that means, you see, like we have also the right to access the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, because we have Somali community. But the Somalis' response was not positive toward that. They said, no, whether it is in Somalia or in Djibouti, still this is a coastal area we have maintained so far, which is it's a Somali identity. It's not our country, whether we are in Ethiopia or in Djibouti, but it is a Somali property. So the Somaliness is quite strong, regardless of the colonial boundary or borders.
Thank you so much. I think the clan connection in Somali is really so strong that I think yesterday, I don't know who was speaking about uh, the Liberians, the Morocco, the Cameroon, no, Burkina Faso, and moving from one to other, somebody who is a citizen in one is becoming a leader in another area. So similarly, sometimes, someone who was a Somali citizen, whom you know, could come to Ethiopia and be a regional leader or one of the cabinet in the minister, that kind of clan connection, as far as he has strong clan connection. What matters is the clan. So you could be in the other part of Somali, but if you have a very good clan connection, you can move to anyone when the clan is in power.
Thank you. Thank you, Fakiado. Actually, it's very inspiring presentation and thought-provoking. I've been thinking since you started to talk. So I have two questions. You said, we need to consider three elements. One of them is agency, and maybe you didn't have time to elaborate on that. So if you can shed light on that, because I think it's important, and I think also it's missing from our conversation. Maybe tomorrow we'll bring some in the final session. Also, the question about very very interesting, and I know it is not unique to the region. That this mixed family that brings refugees and IDPs, and they all live together with one place, but also and I saw that in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, South Sudan, these, mixed families who are split, between the two countries. They cannot go to Sudan. They cannot go to South Sudan. And now after the crisis in Sudan is creating another crisis about, South Sudanese going back to South Sudan, even though they never lived in South Sudan. I also interviewed some mixed families, Ethiopian and Eritreans in Sudan, who cannot go to Ethiopia, cannot go to Eritrea. And I think this is an emerging, field, that we can contribute, to the field of migration in general. I don't want to say another category because we are trying to challenge categorization, but at least to expand, that, not one family will not be the same legal status, will not be the legal same ethnicity because of the diversity of ethnicities in the region. Thank you.
Uh, with the thank you, Amina, for the constructive and the wonderful question. With the agency, I mean, my last project in Somalia was on protracted displacement economy, and that is where we try to understand the economic agency of the refugees. You see, the fact is that the refugees and the people or the host community share similar ethnicity, similar culture, similar language, and also experience. As I said, see, Ethiopian Somalis fled to Somalia, then they came back, see, as returnees, but some of them become refugees in their country because they were see, somewhat, see, then that increased. I mean, I've been doing research among some South Sudanese and Eritrean refugees, but even if it is constrained by structural factors like national refugee law, that refugees do not have, see, the permission to work. There are some changes now that refugees could not move as ever they want. Mobility was constrained for many years. See, the similarity between refugees and the host community gave Somalis better agency, see, to work, even when there was no work permission. It gives them the agency to get local, see, identity when it was not possible to get identity card. See, it helped them, see, to access, see, offices because of their clan relationship. So even if constrained by structural factors, see, there is relatively, see, a strong agency. And I mean, there are the social cohesion between refugees and the host community is relatively stronger than all other refugee communities in Ethiopia. So they have, see, I mean, they have, the Somali are relatively strong in the economy of the region. The refugees are strong in the economy of the region. They are actually, there are cases where it's difficult to differentiate who is refugee, who is the host, because one brother is in the refugee camp, the other brother is a host, probably the other brother is in IDP camp, and these people, they support each other. They have the experience. See, they have changed this experience, see, through this what I call spiral violence, see, over 100 years. So that somewhat gives them the agency, even if it is structural violence on the other hand. So there is agency there. But I never deny the structural constraint to that agency. Uh, no, you're right. I mean, with the Somali, that split started. See, I mean, with Eritreans, it started with War of Independence from Ethiopia for 30 years, with South Sudanese, War of Independence from Sudan. See, imagine how much the Horn of Africa is different. See, we fought against, see, I mean, the War of Independence is with countrymen, see, with an African brother than with the white men. See, the kind of colony we're talking. So South Sudanese fought with Sudan for say, like 40 years. Eritreans fought with Ethiopia like 30 years. The Somali continued to do that, but there is confusion among the Somali because there is no country to long for. You see, because Somalia is a collapsed. You see, some people call it failed state. You see, so there's some contestation. So relatively stable because there's no strong Somalia to join. But that split of families is everywhere in the region, but it has a long history. There is a long history to that. Yeah.
So much, Dr. Fakadu. So now the tea will be a bit late, so what we planned is call all the presenters here and have our it is not ready. So we were thinking if we continue with yeah. So can the presenters come here, or presenters, or six? Yeah, all of
Thank you very much to the panelists for a really good set of presentations. Um, so my first point really builds on Aya's presentation, you know, kind of the limits of precision, all right? And I just want to make a general point stemming out of something that Sarah had said in the previous session about neutrality, right? That, you know, um, so one has to be cautious when you're studying something that is familiar to your community because you need to be neutral, right? Now, I know that we often think in those terms, but I think this idea of neutrality in the social sciences is hard to sustain. Precisely because, and this is how I think of it, I say the social scientists, unlike the geologists or the botanists, you see, the geologists and the botanists, they deal with a rock that's outside or some trees and plants. They are external to them. Now, the social scientist, she's a product of what she studies. She's part of it. Now, she cannot do away with the idea of bias, but the point is to be conscious of the bias and therefore to then deal with it. But the idea of neutrality and objectivity is an attempt to kind of import natural scientific kind of principles into the social sciences. So my other point is to Kua Uba, please forgive me. Kua Uba, I know I'm butchering your name, but forgive me. So really interesting presentation. But you see, I was just worried about okay, I can move to kind of the English or something. And then when yes, yes, sure, would do, yeah. Asaf, good one. I really enjoyed listening to the paper, and just I was thinking if a bit more historical depth would help to situate this forced migration, as you're framing it, economic forced migration from Portugal towards Africa. Because historically, if you think of the movement between the north and the south, it was actually one way. It was the other way around, right? It was from the north towards the south. And even for safety. So if you think of the persecution of Jewish people in Europe, now some of them sought refuge in parts of southern Africa, parts of North Africa, parts of the Horn, right? So you actually have that history of people forcibly displaced from Europe and seeking refuge in Africa. So maybe that kind of historical depth might help situate the case that you are looking at. And Prof. Fekadu, thanks a lot for a master class, I would say, really, because yes, you were talking about conceptualization, but I think there are also methodological questions in there, right? Because we tend to think of theory and methods as separate things, right? That methods, we think of it as the mechanics of doing research, but it's really about how you approach the field, right? The set of questions that you ask. And I think the way you are rethinking these things could be useful for many of us here, which is to say that for certain communities where mobility is normal, right? So, and I want to give the example of, say, groups in parts of what is called the Central Sudan, you know, from Sudan today all the way to northern Nigeria and Niger. The idea of you being sedentary is a problem, right? Why don't you move? There's a problem with you if you're just sitting in one place, right? So if we take some of those conceptions and rethink them, I really think we are onto something. Then I'll come back to Kua Uba. Sorry, now the interpreter is back. So you spoke about ethnic tensions, right? And I was a bit concerned because you see, African societies have been thought of through the ethnic. There was a whole discipline that was invented to study that. It's called anthropology, right? The idea of anthropology is a discipline of the other. So for a very long time, you don't do anthropology in the West. You do it outside of the West, right? And the ethnic is the category through which you understand African societies. But for me, the point is that the ethnic often hides something. Power relations, especially along land, access to resources. And I think Prof. Fekadu's thing points to that indirectly because take Somalis, quintessential one ethnic group, right? But see what is happening in Somalia. The clan system provides the basis for tension, but it's not about the clans. It's about power. It's about control over territory. So I'm saying instead of focusing on the ethnic, why not actually go and look at the issue of contestation? And then we kind of begin to see social processes as product of what people do instead of who they are. Because that's what the ethnic does, that people fight because of who they are instead of because of what is at stake. Thank you.
Intervention.
All right. Thank you. Asaf, like I really love this sort of two-way design of your research. Just wanted to say that, and you've very convincingly shown that this is a gap, that not many people do this kind of design. And as you were talking, I was thinking that there might be another gap that you could add to your gaps that you're addressing with your research, which is this kind of question around racialization within Europe. Because I'm thinking, Portuguese came as guest workers to Germany in the 60s and 70s, and along with the Turks and the Spaniards and the Italians, were definitely considered less white, different. Or in South Africa in the 1950s, when the apartheid government really started freaking out about being in a minority as white people, they also didn't want the Portuguese at first because they were suspicious, they were Catholic, they were suspected to be a bit more lax on racial integration. They took them in the end because it was better for them than even worse for them. So on the one hand, you have that they were being, the Portuguese themselves were being the racialized other. And then now they're going back to Angola where they're kind of, with their magical engineering degrees, positioning themselves again sort of at the top. And I think generally that kind of racialization within Europe between the north and the south and the east and the west, even within Spain, northern Spaniards, the attitude towards southern Spaniards, and in Italy as well. I don't know if that's something you're already thinking along the lines. I would be really grateful if you had some. I couldn't find much literature on it, so that might be another gap that you're kind of also filling with your research. Thanks.
Ok, merci beaucoup. En tout cas, on a eu aujourd'hui un bon paquet de communications intéressantes, toutes intéressantes les unes que les autres, mais en même temps toutes assez particulières les unes par rapport aux autres au regard des données auxquelles on a eu accès. J'ai aimé, en tout cas, les présentations m'ont inspiré un certain nombre de questionnements aussi, parce qu'on est là pour questionner aussi nos propres résultats. Et je suis très satisfait de la présentation de Aya, qui a vraiment, en tant que sciences sociales, spécialiste des sciences sociales, je me suis retrouvé dans la critique qui a été faite des chiffres. Je me vertue toujours à dire que les chiffres, excusez-moi les économistes, mais les chiffres, parler les chiffres. Et elle a réussi à montrer que les chiffres sont parfois limités, parfois ils peuvent même induire l'erreur. Alors, votre pour Numbers où il remet en question, y compris à l'échelle des États, pour montrer que les statistiques aussi peuvent être politiques, sont des objets politiques. Voilà. Ça, en donnant des statistiques, il faut qu'on ait une idée. Il faut savoir que ce ne sont que des statistiques qui peuvent changer du jour au lendemain. Peut-être l'ensemble. J'ai découvert aujourd'hui qu'il y a quand même, on a toujours abordé la solidarité des populations d'accueil. Les populations d'accueil qui reçoivent les migrants, les déplacés, qui essaient d'offrir un cadre de vie aussi. qui m'inspire, en tout cas qui me fait évoluer dans mes réflexions pour dire que les, les migrants, les déplacés, les réfugiés peuvent aussi être solidaires entre eux. Et ça, pour moi, c'est quand même une nouveauté en fait, que je n'ai pas observée ailleurs. Troisième élément, c'est euh, que je veux partager avec vous. Je pense qu'à un certain moment, il faut peut-être qu'on puisse sortir du discours trop compassionnel et victimisant des déplacés, réfugiés, à les regarder comme des gens qui souffrent, comme j'ai découvert aujourd'hui qu'on peut aussi les analyser comme des acteurs qui innovent, des acteurs qui prennent qui entreprennent. L'exemple de Madagascar nous a montré, voilà, ils ont quitté leur zone pour des problèmes environnementaux, mais ils ont réussi à entreprendre dans leur ville d'accueil et deviennent ou s'imposent finalement comme des acteurs incontournables. Parce qu'on a besoin d'eux pour le transport, on a besoin d'eux pour un certain nombre d'autres services qui sont seuls capables d'offrir à des populations autochtones. Je vais terminer par là, peut-être c'est... On n'a pas réussi à je ne sais pas si le mot existe, les francophones sont là, on n'a pas réussi à décatégoriser les déplacés. Décatégoriser au sens de casser les concepts et regarder ce que chaque concept englobe. Quand on dit migrants, déplacés, réfugiés, mais derrière ces grosses catégories, il y a les hommes, il y a les femmes, il y a les enfants, il y a peut-être des commerçants, il y a des fonctionnaires, c'est-à-dire des diplômés qui ont dû quitter leur pays. On n'a pas réussi à... Peut-être c'est un défi pour nous. Il faudrait peut-être à l'avenir regarder ces catégories particulières, hein, parce qu'elles ont des expériences qui ne sont pas forcément les mêmes. Elles ont peut-être des ressources qui ne sont pas les mêmes, à partir desquelles ces catégories ou ces sous-catégories peuvent ou facilement ou difficilement s'intégrer dans les zones d'accueil. J'imagine qu'un prof d'université qui fuit l'insécurité dans un pays et qui se retrouve ailleurs a peut-être plus de chances d'avoir un emploi que, je ne sais pas, quelqu'un qui n'a jamais été à l'école. Enfin, c'est discutable, mais au moins on suppose qu'il y a quand même des éléments de discrimination ici qu'on devrait peut-être mettre en avant. Voilà. Bon, je ne vais pas revenir sur la réflexivité. Le débat sur la réflexivité, je vais le laisser peut-être à la fin. Merci beaucoup.
Great interventions.
Thank you.
Oba. Okay. Before your presentation, I was already pondering about this idea of forced as an adjective for displacements, especially when you look at. Well, I decided to let it, to come and see different perspectives, especially when you now talk about displacement from the non-physical perspective driven by different factors. Okay, you can say there are some elements of probably contesting this idea of force. But with your presentation about creating the context of conflict, I am beginning to wonder why you were conceptualizing displacement, forced migration. I am
And I'm wondering whether post-colonial migration is a useful category at all. What are your thoughts on this? And then also the fact that you're looking at a transnational migration from both sides at the same time makes me wonder what your thoughts are on the relationship between this transnational movement and the concept of the nation state. Is this reinforcing the nation state? Is it weakening the nation state? Is it creating something new? Thank you.
Okay, a quick one for Fekadu. It's interesting and a paradox that the Somali are very united, but Somalia itself is not united. So what explains this? Yes, I mean, the Somali from the different countries in East Africa are very united. They can crisscross borders, undermine borders, work together, take on citizenship in another. What explains the fact that they cannot come together in order to make Somalia what it should really be, because they are very united?
Yeah.
Yeah, may I ask a
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
Merci. Thank you. Je vous ai posé quelques questions pour Aya à propos de la centralité du coup des statistiques. Est-ce que cette centralité, elle existe encore aujourd'hui dans un contexte de montée du populisme qui, notamment en Europe, qui tend au contraire à décrédibiliser l'usage des statistiques et à s'appuyer sur le bon sens, entre guillemets. Donc est-ce que cet usage des statistiques prévaut jusqu'à aujourd'hui?
And so what I would do is give the mic from the beginning with her in sitting arrangement, not in presentation arrangement. Sorry. You wanted to begin here?
Ouais. Ok, du coup, je ne sais pas si je dois répondre ou on doit répondre également à toutes les questions ou on doit toucher à un point particulier. Je ne sais pas.
Répondez d'abord aux questions qui vous sont adressées.
Ah, ok.
Et si vous avez des réflexions générales, allez-y.
Ben justement, il n'y a pas une question qui m'a été adressée. Justement, il n'y a pas une question qui m'a été adressée. Et par contre, c'est vrai, je me suis retrouvé également dans pas mal de questions qui ont été également adressées, je veux dire, au fait, à mes collègues. Entre autres, par exemple, la question qui vient d'être adressée, je crois, à Touzini sur l'intégration. Je vais partir au fait d'un exemple beaucoup plus simple. Au fait, je vais donner moi-même personnellement mon cas. Moi, je suis au fait fils d'un immigré, parce que je me suis présenté, je suis belgo d'origine congolaise, au fait, je veux dire. Et je me rappelle, au fait, quand on arrive également en Europe, en fait, on ne savait absolument rien. Mon père qui était professeur d'université, il se retrouve au fait, on arrive au fait en Allemagne, il parle aucun mot, il pipe aucun mot d'allemand, il a du mal à s'intégrer, il ne pouvait pas malheureusement au fait, traverser au fait, pour aller à la frontière, parce qu'on était dans une ville frontalière entre l'Allemagne et la Belgique. Et du coup, les procédures sont tellement compliquées. À un moment donné, il s'est dit, si je vais encore en Allemagne, je vais en Belgique, je vais dire, pour avoir la facilité de la langue, j'aurai du mal, je vais dire, au fait, à m'intégrer ou à trouver quoi que ce soit. Et donc, du coup, qu'est-ce qu'il fait? Il dit, écoutez, je vais mettre également en veille tout ce que j'ai comme connaissance, tout ce que j'ai comme diplôme et tout. Et je vais également vivre du peu que j'ai, donc se retrouver logisticien. Donc, vous imaginez, on fait ce décalage. Et c'est quelque chose à un moment donné qui s'est dit, écoutez, je vais mettre vraiment j'avale ma fierté. Je vais vraiment avaler ma fierté. Je vais commencer également à apprendre la langue et tout. Et donc l'intégration fut douloureuse. Pourquoi? Parce qu'à un certain âge, on a du mal à s'intégrer. Vous imaginez une personne qui a 56 ou 57, arriver dans un pays où il a vraiment du mal à parler la langue, il pipe aucun mot d'anglais, ni aucun mot d'allemand, uniquement les français, les swahili ou les lingala. Et donc du coup, ce décalage-là, à un moment donné, peut perturber certains. Et malheureusement, mon père était décédé, parce qu'à un moment, au bout de 3 ans, il n'en pouvait plus, des stress et des stress. Il y a des stress à un moment donné qu'on ne se remet pas, quoi. Parce qu'il a été délocalisé de l'endroit où il était, il avait une belle vie. Je veux dire, pas une vie, mais une vie modeste. Il vivait quand même bien. Et d'un jour à l'autre, il se retrouve, par exemple, dans une situation pareille. Donc, pour certains qui sont, je vais dire, au fait, jeunes, développe, c'est ce que je disais dans ma présentation, développe au fait des stratégies d'adaptation, mais beaucoup plus rapides. Mais tout comme pour d'autres qui ont été déracinés de leur endroit, ils ont vraiment du mal, mais alors du mal à se développer. Je vais partir d'un exemple simple de mon travail que j'ai fait par exemple au Congo. J'aime d'ailleurs ce que le docteur Oumarou a dit. Il faudra quand même qu'on songe également à catégoriser. Mais non, la catégorisation, elle existe déjà. Tous ici, nous savons très bien, où nous savons distinguer un migrant d'un réfugié, un réfugié économique ou un migrant économique, évidemment, d'un déplacé, parce qu'il n'y a pas seulement la catégorisation des déplacés internes, il y a également la catégorisation des déplacés externes. La majeure partie des Congolais qui avoisinaient, par exemple, les villes comme Bunagana, Rutshuru et autres, lorsqu'ils fuient vers le Rwanda, souvent, ou l'Ouganda, ils sont placés dans des camps. Parce que là, il n'y a pas de sites, mais il y a par contre des camps. Ils sont placés dans des camps des réfugiés. Et là, on ne les appelle pas souvent des réfugiés, mais on les appelle par contre des déplacés externes. Les problèmes également dans nos différents pays, il n'y a pas non seulement des cadres appropriés qui comment je vais dire en fait, qui répertorient en fait tous ces cas. Donc c'est ce qui fait, par exemple, j'ai parlé d'un exemple beaucoup plus pratique. J'avais suivi quelques cas dans les cas de Tchanika en Ouganda. Vous remarquerez bien par contre en Ouganda, il y a pas mal de gens qui viennent, parce que c'est tout un mélange, un cocktail. Il y a des gens qui viennent de Kinshasa, où il n'y a aucune alternative de fuite, parce que je ne sais pas si vous savez cette notion d'alternative de fuite dans les jargons migratoires, mais ils viennent à Kinshasa, c'est en majeure partie des migrants économiques. Ils sont bien. Là, il n'y a pas vraiment la guerre comparativement à l'Est. Alors qu'il y a certaines personnes qui nécessitent ces besoins, se retrouvent également dans ces camps-là, mais ils n'ont aucune aide. Ceux qui viennent à Kinshasa, par contre, à cause de l'absence d'un cadre, je vais dire, approprié, qui répertorie et qui écoute, je vais dire, les différents cas, on accorde beaucoup plus d'importance à ces personnes-là au détriment. Je parle rapidement. Pardon. Donc on accorde plus d'importance à ces personnes-là qu'aux personnes qui en ont besoin. Et ça que je parle vraiment rapidement, je m'efforce. Il y a Arzo. Ah ok. Quand tu langues, ça vient. Ah, ok, ça va être le donc, et ah, ok. D'accord. Donc, je pense qu'ici, c'est ce que je disais, il faudra qu'on songe un peu à repenser statistiques à repenser cadre qui, je vais dire, au fait, s'occupe réellement des cas, mais qui sont concrets, et aussi, comme vous l'avez dit, à renforcer cette catégorisation, à bien définir surtout, en fait. Donc, comme l'idée de la conférence, c'est de repenser les déplacements forcés en Afrique, je dirais, au fait, qu'il faudra peut-être qu'on repense les stratégies. Les stratégies en matière de la question des déplacés, de la question des DPI, au fait. Je trouve, au fait, que la question, elle est assez large, mais les stratégies ne sont pas bien définies, ou soit par moment, elles s'avèrent un peu inefficaces. Merci beaucoup.
Merci. Je vais revenir sur le problème des crises ethniques. Voilà. Comme l'exemple qui a été donné dans d'autres pays africains. Allez, si nous avions travaillé sur ces thèmes, parce que la République démocratique du Congo, dans sa frontière avec le Congo-Brazzaville, a connu pratiquement trois crises successives.
Sorry, I think there is a problem with the translation. So, as Loat suggested, we can have a break now. So the time for us to. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Yes. So we shall have the break now. The time for us to fix the problem, and we will have a very short session afterward before the bus leaves, and so you can all go back to St. Louis. So the coffee break is open. So let's say 20 to 25 minutes.
Donc on va essayer de reprendre un petit peu la discussion. J'en profite pour parler doucement en attendant que, que tout le monde s'installe et pour que le live stream se mette en place aussi et qu'on fasse un test par rapport à la traduction pour voir si tout fonctionne. Donc pour ceux qui en ont besoin, je vous laisse mettre vos écouteurs. Et voilà, pour voir si la traduction fonctionne. Juste avant qu'on revienne à la discussion générale, on doit avoir une annonce par Marco, une annonce assez importante par rapport aux modalités d'organisation demain. Et je ferai ensuite une autre annonce par rapport à ce soir. Marco, si tu veux venir. Donc, ok, donc on peut attendre encore un petit peu. Et déjà au niveau... Je suis en train de revenir, t'inquiète pas. Oh. Et au niveau de la traduction, ça fonctionne? Vous avez la traduction qui arrive dans vos oreilles? Translation works. Ok, great. Ok.
Okay, just before we start again, I have just a short announcement how this is going to work tomorrow, because tomorrow we have the last day of the conference, but at the same time we have to go back to Chies, to the hotel there, so it's also the traveling tomorrow. But don't worry, we won't travel in 2 minibuses, but 1 big bus. So this is already the good news, but we also have to take our luggage with us in the morning. So this is the other part, because we don't go back to the hotel. We would have to check out by noon, and so it wouldn't make sense to go back to leave the suitcases there and then to fetch them just to go down to Chies. So we already put them in the bus in the morning, and we will leave with the bus at 8:15, right? You said, okay. So 8:15, the bus will leave. So I mean, it shouldn't take long to put the luggage in, but we need at least like we have now. We had like 3/4 of an hour, so that would make 7:30. Well, let's say 7:45. We would all be at the bus, put the luggage in, and then we go. No, hang on, we have, what did we say? We leave So yeah, it would be 7:30 by the bus, so to put the luggage in and be here, and then, no, hang on. I'm not good with 7:40. So 7:45 at the bus, we put the luggage in, and when we leave to here, and we will have some more time because in the program it says 3 p.m. we leave for Chies, but I mean we will probably leave a bit earlier from here. Hmm? Yeah, but you know, I mean. Saturday also with the catering, so we don't want to take chances, and so it would be better than 7:45 at the bus. We put the luggage in and then we leave here to La Spot. Est-ce que tout le monde a compris le francophone? Très bien.
Très bien. Thank you, Marco. So Augusto said no party tonight, but we have something else in mind, and this is the second announcement. Pour celles et ceux qui sont intéressés, l'équipe du LASPAT de Saint-Louis vous propose d'aller dans un marché pour acheter quelques souvenirs éventuellement. Donc ce qui va se passer, c'est qu'à l'issue de la conférence, là, qu'on va essayer de terminer dans, disons, une trentaine de minutes, 25-30 minutes, il y aura le bus qui va aller à l'hôtel comme d'habitude, mais il y aura aussi des taxis qui vont partir depuis le campus directement pour le marché. Sinon, il va être trop tard et on pourra pas. En fait, on n'a pas le temps de passer à l'hôtel d'abord pour aller au marché ensuite. Donc, si certaines personnes sont intéressées pour aller acheter des souvenirs en groupe, voilà, c'est possible. Donc, juste après cette conférence, vous irez directement au marché et ensuite vous irez à l'hôtel. Et c'est tout à fait possible aussi d'aller directement à l'hôtel. Voilà. Je ne sais pas si j'ai été très très clair, surtout pour les anglophones. Et donc si vous êtes intéressé, vous vous manifestez auprès de nous pour qu'on puisse savoir combien de personnes sont concernées, combien de taxis il faut faire venir, etc. Donc on fera ça à la fin de la conférence, il n'y a pas de problème. S'il n'y a pas de questions, Ababaou, I leave you the floor to proceed to the end of the general discussion. We come back to the general discussion. It's on you. Okay. I think we started to answer the questions.
Ok, merci. Je reviens sur la question des crises ethniques en Afrique. Le commentaire qui a été fait, c'est que ces crises existent un peu partout en Afrique. Pour le cas de la République du Congo et la République démocratique du Congo que nous avions mis en évidence, nous avions constaté qu'en 2002, il y a eu une crise. En 2018, une deuxième crise. En 2022, une troisième crise. Dans un sens purement général, ce qu'on va retenir ici, c'est que nous n'arrivons pas à avoir une politique de prévention des crises. Et on fait plus du curatif, si je peux me permettre l'expression. On attend que les crises se produisent, après on cherche les partenaires pour venir nous appuyer, alors qu'on peut aujourd'hui élaborer une politique conséquente de résolution des conflits, surtout des conflits interethniques en Afrique. Voilà de cette façon-là que je voulais reprendre. Maintenant, si je reviens un peu sur une remarque qui a été faite par une proposition par le docteur Amani de la catégorisation des migrants. Dans le cadre de ce travail, nous avions pu faire cette catégorisation. Et je pense que si le test vous est soumis, vous allez regarder la catégorisation qu'on a fait. Alors, nous avions voulu mettre, lorsque nous avons présenté les résultats, mettre un accent particulier un peu sur les différentes expressions. Quand les gens arrivent, au lieu qu'on connaît bien qu'ils ont effectué un déplacement, et donc ce sont des migrants forcés, ils ont affranchi la frontière. Et quand ils arrivent, les mécanismes mis en place, quand on parle de les trucs de Genève, font de telle sorte qu'on fait passer du temps au lieu de trouver des solutions idoines aux gens qui sont en urgence. On fait passer du temps pour dire que X doit répondre à tel questionnaire, et ce sont des longs questionnaires qui font 6 à 7, voire des années, sans pourtant que les gens ont des statuts. Or, tant qu'ils n'ont pas ce statut qu'on appelle statut de réfugié, ils ne peuvent rien bénéficier. Et le niveau local ne peut même pas en profiter. Et dans la catégorisation des gens de la RDC qui sont arrivés au niveau de Brazzaville, nous avions eu des médecins. Et quand ils ont été répertoriés, c'est eux qui animent les centres de santé dans ces localités-là. Donc ils sont utiles. Mais pour les découvrir, pour les laisser travailler, on a passé pratiquement plus d'une année et qu'on l'a laissé errer dans des conditions très compliquées. Pourquoi? Parce qu'ils n'ont pas de statut. Ils attendaient qu'on puisse leur donner le statut de réfugié. C'est un peu ces expressions-là que... Sinon, c'est dans la catégorisation, nous avions tout le monde. La différence entre personnes déplacées ou déplacement forcé et migration forcée. Allez. Et dans les différentes expressions que nous avions utilisées, on utilisera le mot déplacement forcé. Et lorsque on parle au niveau interne, bien entendu, au niveau interne, on utilise plus les déplacements, c'est ce qu'on appelle les PDI, les personnes déplacées internes. Mais quand on utilise le mot migration, il y a déjà l'affranchissement d'une frontière. Et car cela ne tienne, nous, dans cette présentation, on a voulu pouvoir dire que ce sont des mots qui, au finish, se ressemblent ou disent pratiquement la même chose. Un déplacé, une personne déplacée ou un migrant, il suffit qu'ils ont affranchi la frontière et qu'on sait que la raison principale, c'est qu'ils ont fui. Ça veut dire qu'une migration forcée ou une personne déplacée forcée, à notre avis, on devait peut-être regarder les choses autrement que de pouvoir revenir sur, pour que la personne ait le statut de réfugié, il faut répondre à telle question, il faut montrer que au retour, tu serais vraiment menacé. Vous voyez que quelqu'un qui a fui sa localité et arrive, on dit, il faut démontrer que si tu repars dans ta localité, tu serais menacé. On peut se poser la question, comment on peut démontrer ça? Et quand on demande, par exemple, de justifier avec une carte d'identité, est-ce qu'en fouillant, on peut encore chercher le temps de trouver une carte d'identité? Il s'agit de tous ces aspects-là qu'à notre avis, il faudra qu'on arrive à commencer à mettre un peu en cause les règles de droit qui ont été établies depuis des années. Le droit peut aussi évoluer aujourd'hui. Est-ce qu'on va continuer à rester à parler du droit de 1951 ou 1960? Est-ce qu'on va continuer à parler de ça? Est-ce qu'on ne peut pas faire évoluer les choses? Et la conclusion que nous avions tirée, c'est que en 2022, dès que les autorités du Congo ont compris ça, ils ont abandonné tout ce qui était règles de droit pour donner le statut de réfugié et ils ont donné le statut de réfugié à tous ceux qui étaient arrivés. Il suffisait qu'ils étaient identifiés dans leur site. Voilà un peu ce qui s'est passé et ce que je souhaiterais partager avec vous. Merci.
Okay. Oh. Okay. Arian, thank you so much. I got it right this time. Hallelujah. Yeah, thank you for your question. Yes, you are right. There was a period where those were expelled from Angola and Mozambique went to, or Portuguese citizens who, or Angolan white or Mozambican white were kicked out of Mozambique. They went to South Africa, and the South African government was very reluctant to accept them. Actually, they call them the white Ks, the K word. That's how they call them. The K word is the Arabic word for kafir. So in South Africa, it's quite offensive, but that's how they call them. They call them the white kafirs, so to say. Sorry, I hope, yeah. So you have these elements. I mean, one of the criticism was the fact that the Portuguese were sort of considered of very much into marriage, interracial marriage, which was forbidden in South Africa. But they had other ways of discriminating people, which in many cases still pretty much part of the Portuguese society, where you don't have laws, but as a black person, you know where to go, where not to go. You know, the laws are not visible like what you have in South Africa, but you, yeah. But then you have what David Rodigan, I think, yeah, that's the name. He wrote a book on how immigrants became white. So you have certain groups like the Jewish community, the South Italian community from Sicilian, the Greeks and the Portuguese, who were not considered whites in the USA or Australia, but at a certain point they became whites. So they sort of accept them. The same process I think you can have in Germany, where, for example, you have the Polish in the 80s, where they were considered the bad people, and today they're considered example of integration, example of good migrants. I think Sarrazin's book on how Germany is destroying self, it talks about how the Polish sort of example of good migrants and so forth. So what I'm trying to say is you have certain groups at a certain time in history where they are kind of integrated, and the
the racialization doesn't play a significant role. That's the case what happened to Portuguese. And when they came to Germany, they were discriminated, they were racially classified as not being white enough, but today is no longer the case. You have actually lots of cooperation between the far-right groups in Portugal and the far-right groups in Germany today. They collaborate. And interesting enough, these are people who probably 20 years ago, they wouldn't be considered white. But today are considered white. So again, that's the element that I'm trying to push here. So definitely you have that element, but also you have the old discourse of Lusotropicalism in Brazil, the idea that the Portuguese are not racist, the Portuguese are welcoming, and therefore racism is a thing of other European countries, but not a thing of Portugal. But today, it's very clear, it becomes very clear that the society always been racist. So it's very clear, I mean, the right-wing party that is now winning lots of seats in parliament, so is coming up with a very strong anti-immigration, anti-black, anti-Sinti Roma discourse. In that sense, So you have a group that was marginalized, but today is no longer marginalized, so to say. So they're part of the global fight against immigration, against Muslims, so to say. They believe strongly in great replacement theory and so forth. So that's what you have. Coming back to your question, Marcia, I think when there is, I don't know whether it's a misunderstanding or is just trying to get publications or so, the idea that the Portuguese influence, the Portuguese connection to Angola ended 1975. But that's not the case, because right after 1975, you have the Angolan president complaining that most of the members of the party, they don't go for holidays in Angola, they go to Portugal. So it was already 1975. And then in our long conversation, when we're coming from this to here, I mentioned the fact that you have certain sectors of Angolan culture or economic society that is dominated by white Angolans and Angolans of mixed race. But obviously, if you talk about openly, then you'll be accused of trying to stir up something. I think you know Angolan authors like Agualusa, Pepetela, Onjaki, all of those people have directly or indirectly connection to Portugal. So they're Angolans, definitely Angolans. I mean, there's no doubt about it, but they are strongly connected. So in that sense, when you talk about post-colonial Angolans, I think it gives an impression that somehow the connection sort of broke after many left to Portugal. But that's not the case. I mean, then the other element is the coloniality of the language. You know, I mean, in Angola, you do have a significant number of Angolans who were born in Angola, who grew up in Angola, who never been to Portugal, but they speak Portuguese as a mother tongue. They have Portuguese names. I mean, even to this day in Angola, if you go to register your son or daughter, and they see that the name is too African, they say, well, maybe you should change your name and put something like João or Antonio or Pedro, so because that's what's considered to be Angolan. So those things are there. So to say that it's post-colonial is also problematic. Then you have the economic connections. I mean, during the economic crisis, you have significant investment of Angola money in Portugal. It was case of Isabel dos Santos buying almost all the properties in Portugal and so forth. And obviously there were lots of corruption, but the Portuguese, they just, they accept it. And so, and every political scandal related to money laundering, there's always a connection to Angola. So the elite's always been cooperating. So that's something that's why the post-colonial people is also a bit problematic. And another element is people who have their grandfathers or grandparents from Portugal, they do have these transnational connections. When the things are not going well in Angola, they move to Portugal. When things are not going well in Portugal, they move to Angola. So that's why the post-colonial, I don't know if he's talking about the break or continuity. So my argument is always being the coloniality, that continuity of it. I mean, to this very day in Angola, they don't teach any African language in primary school. If you want to learn an African language, you have to go to Alliance Française. So, that's all. You have to be part of the church. If you grow up in a church, a traditional church, then, there are some songs and so, but in general, those things are still there. So you can't really just say, okay, it's post-colonial, when it's a bit more complex in that. So I didn't finish reading the book, but I know about the book, so that will be probably my criticism of it. So I think there's a bit more continuity than a completely break, so to say.
Thank you. I think there's only one major question from Henry, which says why, given the fact that the Somalis are positive about one another, the border, the colonial border is fluid, so the question is why Somalis are not united. This also relates me to Faisal's comment on ethnicity. In 1960, the British Somaliland and Italian Somaliland were united to form the Republic of Somalia. And interestingly, in 1963, when OAU was established, every African country's leadership was envy of Somalia, because Somalia was the only nation state in the European model. You see, one language, one religion, you see, one ethnicity. Then, because they undermined the situational and the fluidity nature of ethnicity, that Faisal said it's not ethnicity but power, which is perfect, because the power relation exists at different layers. It's not only ethnicity what matters, but there are several layers of identity. So clan became quite important in the ethnically homogeneous Somalia. So for Henry's question, the Somalia's failure to unite is both external and internal. External, in response to the external force, the Somali nationalists suggested, worked on a project of Greater Somalia, which the external forces didn't allow. So resulted in a war between Ethiopia and part of Kenya, between Somalia and the Kenya somewhat, but major war between Ethiopia and the Somalia. So there's external force to it. But the internal force is also quite tough. You see, after 3 decades, the unity of the 1960 between North and the South was broken in 1991 when the North declared independence, which means it's along clan line, more or less. So Somali nationalism is extremely fragmented, as of course many other nationalisms as well. So the fragmentation is across ethnic line, but also there are different interests. Thus, ethnicity alone does not make significant change when there are other interests that fragment them. But the Somalis are good when they react to outside force, and they are bad when they are towards each other internally. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Merci. Je vais plutôt répondre à la question de Aïsson. par rapport à l'engagement politique ou un constat de l'engagement de la part de ces Tandouis. Tout d'abord, il faut rappeler qu'il y a ce déplacement forcé, c'est parce qu'il y a cette sécheresse chronique et récurrente dans la partie sud-sud de Madagascar. Et ces déplacements, et c'est plutôt aussi dans le but politique, hein, c'est pour faire voir que, ben voilà, nous nous déplaçons parce que beaucoup de projets se trouvent dans le sud, d'où le nom cimetière de projets dans le sud. Pourtant, il n'y a pas d'évolution. Les gens, les personnes sont toujours dans des problèmes d'insécurité alimentaire qui ne changent pas, il n'y a pas d'évolution. Et c'est plutôt une stratégie politique aussi, leur déplacement pour des différentes régions, précisément région Antimandefana au sud-ouest, et aussi la région de Boué ou Majunga. Et c'est une autre manière de dire aussi aux communautés internationales ou les PTF qu'ils ont échoué. Ils ont échoué du point de vue que s'il y a ce nombre de déplacements forcés de Tandouis, c'est qu'ils n'ont pas réussi dans leur mission. Et par rapport à la catégorisation que Dr Omani avait précisée, je ne l'ai pas pu mettre dans le slide, mais pendant les terrains que j'ai faits, c'est plutôt les jeunes hommes ou les jeunes couples qui se déplacent. Les personnes âgées ou les grands-mères, les vieux hommes, les chefs de lignages restent au village, gardiens de savoir, gardiens de tout ce qui est rite, tradition. Et que font alors ces jeunes couples ou bien ces jeunes hommes qui se déplacent? Dès qu'ils ont pu un peu regrouper des sous ou bien des moyens financiers, ou quand il y a des rites à faire dans leur village, ils s'y retournent pour faire le rituel en restant au moins 1 mois, 2 mois, 3 mois. Et après, ils vont revenir ou bien changer de localité par rapport à leurs besoins économiques et par rapport à l'accueil auquel ils ont fait, et auquel ils ont eu plutôt pendant leur déplacement. Bon, je crois que c'est tout comme question. Merci.
Merci. Tout d'abord, je vous remercie, Monsieur Hamani, d'avoir abordé la question de l'interprétation des chiffres. L'analyse des débats parlementaires, elle met en évidence la malléabilité absolue des données prospectives. C'est quelque chose que je remarque beaucoup, c'est-à-dire qu'un même chiffre prospectif et alarmiste qui concerne les migrations climatiques, il va à la fois être repris par les défenseurs de la cause pour dire que oui, on va avoir plus de migrants climatiques, donc il faut agir de manière préventive. Et à contrario, les opposants à la question qui utilisent les mêmes chiffres pour, eux, justifier la fermeture des frontières. Et donc, l'outil quantitatif, il fonctionne finalement comme un simple miroir des angoisses sociétales, et le sens d'une donnée mathématique, elle dépend uniquement de l'agenda politique de l'orateur. Je pense que j'ai partiellement répondu à la question concernant la montée des populismes, mais on voit que les élus politiques populistes vont effectivement instrumentaliser la projection démographique alarmistes pour masquer leur agenda idéologique de fermeture des frontières derrière une façade de rationalité. Enfin, ça fait beaucoup plus scientifique de dire on va fermer les frontières parce qu'on va avoir 200 millions de migrants climatiques plutôt que de dire uniquement il faut fermer les frontières. Ce que je remarque aussi, c'est que ces formations politiques, elles vont essayer de délibérément entretenir la confusion entre l'incertitude et l'ignorance. En fait, le législateur, il va fonder son argumentaire sur un postulat biaisé. Donc pour eux, l'impossibilité technique d'isoler mathématiquement la variable environnementale ça équivaudrait à son existence absolue. C'est-à-dire que si on n'arrive pas à montrer qu'une famille X ou Y migre uniquement pour des considérations environnementales, ça veut dire que la migration climatique n'existe pas. Donc c'est un peu le raccourci que vont prendre les formations populistes, donc de faire l'amalgame entre incertitude et ignorance, alors qu'on est ici face à ce que Henri nomme une science incertaine fiable, c'est-à-dire un savoir qui va effectivement comporter des marges d'erreur inhérentes à la modélisation des systèmes complexes, mais qui va quand même demeurer suffisamment solide pour fonder l'action. Donc c'est ce qui veut dire par science incertaine fiable. Merci.
I would like to add two pointers. Number one was what Faisal raised about this north-south, south-north hosting or migration. I think we are only focusing to recent developments. Otherwise, for example, Ethiopia has been hosting Armenians during the Turkish-Armenian conflict, and we have Armenian church in the middle of Addis, and that is related to that. And we also hosted Greeks. This is not about nationalism or something like that. It's about there were movements from one to the other side. That's one. And the other about the Somalis. We don't know about the future, but currently, forgetting the bigger Somali, our fear is rather even with the present Somali, there are a lot of challenges. For example, Jubaland has issue with the federal government. Baidoa has issue with the federal government. So, by the way, Somali is an interesting nature in the region because, for example, in Ethiopia, we complain about ethnic federalism, that because we are ethnically divided, we have conflicts. We have a lot of conflicts, by the way, because of this ethnic difference, whatever. But sometimes you could be the same ethnic, uniform, and then, as rightly said, because of power or because there are people who want to manipulate situations for benefit, conflicts tend to remain to be a status quo. Maybe, in the entire discussion, one thing that I am feeling at this point is we haven't raised much about this free movement in Africa. Well, we have the African Free Movement Protocol. As scholars belonging to the region, how can that really be realized is a very good question that we need to contribute to. Because, to my understanding, much of the challenges that we have in Africa related to forced displacement is more to governments and regional powers than to the people in communities. Communities can easily, host one another and live together, but that boundaries and political interests in the border by governments is really the biggest challenge. While they are advocating for free movement at Africa level, movement within a region and with neighbors is still stuck, and I think we need to work in that regard. I think before I close it, if there is a question that you would say this is burning and I want to be answered, I would give one or two voices. If there is something, no, this is important and I don't want to miss it. One, I have Henry. Is there anyone who would like to add?
I want to ask Danny, he talked about limited spaces in areas that are controlled by armed groups. have you taken time to find out areas where armed groups are controlling and the people are comfortable with the armed groups, and when the army comes in, what is your experience where they are instead against maybe the state forces and they are comfortable with the people who are the armed groups that are controlling and are fighting against the state forces? What is your experience? Do the armed group, do the state forces limit also the space as a result of the fact that the population maybe they are comfortable with the armed groups? Have you ever had that? Have you come across that experience?
J'ai compris partiellement, mais je vais encore revenir au fait j'ai compris partiellement, mais je vais cette fois-ci écourter. C'est vrai que cette question, et, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, elle est sui generis, au fait. Ça veut dire elle est vraiment du genre particulier. Il y a les gouvernements congolais a signé pas mal des mécanismes internationaux qui sont mis en place, des conventions et tout. Les gouvernements congolais également champions en participation dans l'examen périodique universel. Et elle est vraiment partout, elle participe à toutes ces discussions. Mais quand à ce qui concerne également la mise en œuvre de ces mécanismes-là et de ces lois, alors là, c'est vraiment une autre paire de manches. Mais aussi, il faut quand même que vous sachiez que la question migratoire en Afrique, je ne sais pas si au niveau d'Israël, c'est pareil, mais chez nous, surtout à l'est, pas à l'est de la RDC, mais dans la région des Grands Lacs, c'est vraiment une question tellement épineuse et souvent la prise en charge, elle n'est pas vraiment totale, au fait. Elle est juste une prise en charge théorique, mais dans la pratique, c'est autre chose. Pourquoi? Parce que souvent, nos gouvernements n'ont pas de moyens suffisants. La capacité d'accueil, par exemple, elle est tellement limitée. Je vais me circonscrire, par exemple, dans le temps. En 1994, lors du génocide rwandais, à l'est de la RDC, dans la ville de Goma, il y a eu un afflux massif des réfugiés rwandais qui devraient, il y a quand même pas mal de principes de droit international qui nous avaient imposé de leur accorder ce qu'on appelle les sauf-conduits, donc les passages, parce qu'à un moment donné, on devait accepter qu'ils entrent. Mais sauf les camps dans lesquels on les avait logés, les camps de Mugunga avaient une capacité maximale d'accueillir tout au plus au moins une soixantaine des déplacés, non, des réfugiés, parce qu'à l'époque-là, c'était des réfugiés. Mais sauf que nous nous sommes retrouvés avec plus de 2 ou 3 millions des personnes qui ont fui, enfants, femmes, vieillards, y compris des génocidaires dedans. Et c'est d'ailleurs, c'est ce qui occasionne aujourd'hui l'agression rwandaise, parce que c'est un justificatif. Parce que comme on avait accepté, sous pression internationale, d'accorder le sauf-conduit à tous ces mondes-là, c'est devenu aujourd'hui un prétexte d'agression de la part du gouvernement rwandais dans la partie est de la RDC. Donc vous voyez, c'est ce que je disais. Il y a plusieurs imbrications dans cette question. Mais c'est ce qui fait qu'à un moment donné, le gouvernement congolais est devenu méfiant dans tout ce qui concerne aussi la capacité d'accueil. Et aussi, il y a, comme je vous ai dit, des moyens. En plus de la méfiance, il y a également plusieurs questions beaucoup plus interethniques qui occasionnent tout ça. Bref, au fait, si on commence à parler de cette question, en toute honnêteté, on peut aller jusqu'à ouais, elle est interminable, au fait. Et je crois que je préfère m'arrêter par là pour ne pas monopoliser la parole en même temps. Je vous en prie.
So, one round of applause for all the colleagues. Thank you so much. Okay. Now for you. I think Ayrton has message.
Yeah, thank you. You can go back to your seat. Thank you very much. So this marks the end of of the panel. Donc on peut terminer la session d'aujourd'hui, la session complète. Donc Marco vous a donné les informations par rapport à demain matin. Quant aux informations sur la suite de la journée, là j'ai fait circuler une petite liste qui est tout à fait indicative. Donc si vous vous êtes inscrit quelque part et que vous avez changé d'avis, il n'y a absolument aucun problème. Mais l'idée c'est qu'on se retrouve tous en bas, soit pour prendre le bus, soit pour prendre un taxi pour aller au marché, et on vous répartira dans les groupes en bas. Donc là il est 17h20, donc vous pouvez dès maintenant ranger vos affaires et partir. Merci beaucoup en tout cas.